Hi everyone, I'm Sarah and welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be bringing you my May/June wrap-up. So I know I took a break from posting on YouTube for the month of June, so I never posted a May wrap-up, and I also never posted June wrap-up, so I thought I would post them together, but have no fear, I barely read the last 2 months, so I'm going to be talking about 5 books, right? 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about 5 books. The first book I'm going to talk about is The Farm by Joanne Ramos. This is like a dystopian-esque contemporary that is basically set in sort of inside of a compound where surrogates live while they're pregnant. But basically it's the story of Jane as she kind of gets involved in this surrogacy organization. She is an immigrant from the Philippines who has a very, very young daughter and who also just left her husband. And so she's really struggling to find a job and to find a way to take care of her very, very young daughter. Her daughter, I think, is about 6 months old or so, maybe a little bit less than that when the story starts. So she ends up finding out about the surrogacy place, and she ends up applying and gets approved. And so she basically packs up her stuff and leaves for 9 months or so as she's pregnant and until she gives birth to this child. You really experience the sort of psychological warfare that's being played on these women because they are monitored and controlled every second of every day. Their sleep schedule is dictated, their diet is dictated. They have to have so many hours of different activities that are good for the fetuses. And it's also incredibly inhumane in the fact that when we're in May's point of view, who is the manager of the entire estate, her and her staff refer to the women as hosts. So they'll say host 83 or host 67. And they don't refer to these women as their actual names, and everything is very much geared towards the eventual healthy baby that will happen at the end of this pregnancy. It was honestly one of the best books I've read this year. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was not expecting to love it as much as I did, just because it's a bit of an intense topic, it's a bit of an intense book. But I absolutely adored Joanne Ramos's writing. I really liked the characters that she created, and I also really, really loved the kind of the intersection of class and economic status and race and how that all sort of fits in together. You know, majority of the women that are at this compound are immigrants who don't really have any other options. And it's a great opportunity. They'll get a ton of money and all these different things. And so they really play on that aspect. I really liked the ending. I understand that it's not as satisfying as some people would have wanted, but it felt very true to what Joanne Ramos was trying to do, which is have a sort of dialogue about classism. And it's very, very interesting. So yeah, I ended up giving that book 5 stars because I loved it. The second book I'm going to talk about is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I absolutely loved this book. I am just so blown away by this book. I was a little bit hesitant when it was like a military fantasy, because I don't particularly enjoy military stuff. I don't particularly enjoy war for the sake of war. So this is the story of Rin, who ends up getting accepted into Sinigard, which is a most prestigious military academy. She tests in and she faces a lot of discrimination because she's darker skinned and she's from the poor provinces, and she has a lot to prove to herself and to her classmates. But yeah, so it follows her story as she's accepted into this academy, and she starts training and starts her schooling, and then I think it's her 3rd year, I believe, at the academy, war breaks out between the empires, and her classmates are kind of all assigned to different roles, and they all separate, you know, and they have to deal with the actual reality of war. There's a massive difference between, the one thing that this book really reiterates time and time again is the difference between the sort of theoretical aspects of war and the reality of war. I am absolutely in love with the setup for the sequel. I cannot wait. I refuse to believe that certain characters are gone because I'm not having that, but, you know, I'm gonna resign myself for that to be the case. So yeah, we'll see. I'm trying to read the sequel soon because I loved this book so much. I gave this also 5 stars because it was just so well done. The characters felt very real. The story was really, really interesting, and everything I thought it was going to be, it turned out to be something different. Like, I went into this book thinking it was going to be almost purely Rin's schooling. And then, like, a third of the way through the book, it turned into this war epic. And then it turned into this whole, like, gods and magic. And then it turned into, like, the realities of war. It just, every time I thought I kind of knew where it was going, it kind of changed on me. So I'm really interested in the sequel. I absolutely loved this book. I highly recommend it. But do take heed. There are quite a few trigger warnings. Nothing's too graphic, like nothing's too graphic in massive detail except for one specific chapter, and that's chapter 21. But I really loved this book. I gave this 5 stars. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Tiger's Daughter by Arsenault Rivera. So this book was about 2 warrior women, the lives that they've led and how they've fallen in love with each other. The actual blurb for this book talks about how they're 2 warrior women and they are fighting demons and they have to protect their land from a darkness that no one really sees coming, and then they fall in love. Now, I would argue that that's not what this book is. This book is basically a letter from one of the women, Shefali, to the other woman, Shizuka, detailing their life together. Going so far back as to when they met when they were 3 years old. And it's written and the whole letter is written in second person. So yeah, I didn't particularly like this book. I didn't particularly enjoy it. I gave it 2 stars, because I think I gave it 2 stars because I liked the idea of a female-female romance, because there's not enough of them. And I liked the idea of incorporating, like, demons and magic, because demons are not something that we see too often, and so I was interested in that. Everything else, though, was pretty much a letdown for me. It's gonna be, to be totally frank with you, I felt completely tricked into reading this book, because what the blurb said and what the book actually was were 2 completely different things. I didn't pick up this book expecting to read a detailed history of the 2 women's lives together since they were 3 years old, and, like, have that not really end up mattering. Like, the letter is about 95% of the book, and there's interspersed little moments in the present with Shizuka, who's reading this letter. And every time I got to her, I was waiting to find out what was going on, like, what were we building towards? Because the biggest problem with this type of story is that we know from the get-go that Shefali's still alive, so there's really no stakes in any of these moments. Like, she's writing this letter to her massively in the future, so when they get into trouble when they're 8 years old, when they're 16, when they're 18, like, none of that holds a whole lot of value or stakes because we know that they're fine. And the other problem is, like, a lot of the things that they were talking about or the kind of adventures they went on sounded really interesting, and I kind of wanted to know more about them, but they were glossed over, and I just kept waiting for the plot to drop. Like, I kept waiting for the moment where I was like, okay, this is why we're getting the letter. And even at the end of the book, there is a scene in this letter that we get to, and I was like, oh, okay, this is why we're writing this letter now. Okay, I'm with you now. Then I'm like, okay, so it's setting up this magic quest for the sequel. But then that wasn't what happened either. That was ignored also. So it just was a pretty big letdown for me. I didn't really enjoy it, and there was a bit of issues with kind of appropriation at times. There is a Goodreads review that I will link down below as well for anyone slightly interested in this book that can explain it a lot better than me, because it is written by a Japanese woman, because I am not an authority to talk about that. So yeah, I ended up giving this book only 2 stars. I did not enjoy it. So the next book I want to talk about is Elantris by Sanderson. This is the story of Irulan. I think that's how you say the like land, the empire or city's name. And it's sort of not fall from grace, but it's sort of revolution, I guess, in a sense. We follow three different characters, Raoden, Harathan, and Serene. Raoden was the crown prince, and he was exiled at the beginning of the book. Falls under the Shroud. Shroud. I don't really know how to say it. I'm gonna say Shroud. He falls under the Shroud, which is kind of a curse that your skin turns gray and your hair falls out, and you are considered cursed by the people, because the Shroud used to mean that you were going to turn into an Elantrian, which was kind of a godlike being that lived in the city of Elantris, that basically ran the neighboring towns and cities, gave them lots of stuff. And so he is living in the Elantrian city where everything is broken and ruined, and he is working at building something in there for the people that are there, because they don't consider themselves people anymore. And so that was super interesting. And then Serene is on the outside, and she was engaged to Raoden and found out that he died as soon as she lands in Irulan. And so she's grieving a man that she didn't know and the man that she kind of loved. And she's working at trying to figure out her place in this, she's trying to figure out her place in this new land, while also fighting against a sort of religious extremist organization. So she's struggling to find her place, and she's basically trying to step into Raoden's shoes, because he was leading a type of rebellion himself. And then you have Harathan, who is the leader of this religious extremist organization, who came to Irulan in hopes of saving it before his brethren come and basically destroy it. It was really very interesting, because all three of them have completely separate goals and desires and tasks, but they all intersect, so every single character intersects at a certain time. And I just thought it was so well done. I really enjoyed this. I love that it was a standalone fantasy. I think we need more of those. I really loved this. I am excited to read more of his work in the future, and I gave this one also 5 stars. The final book I'm going to talk about is Fragments of the Lost. So this was a YA thriller that follows Jessa as she struggles with the grief of losing her ex-boyfriend Caleb, and she's trying to piece together secrets that he had while she's cleaning out his room after he dies. I gave this 2 stars. I was really unimpressed, to be honest. I think the idea of the story did not work very well. The fact that they were 17, that she was a senior in high school, and her and Caleb were only together for a year, this idea that she's worried about him having this whole other life kind of rang oddly for me. It rang weird to me. It didn't really hold a lot of weight, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And she's finding these different things and is convinced that he has this other secret life, and that he was cheating on her and all these other things, which is fine, but then there's this whole other big conspiracy that's going on, and I just wasn't that impressed. I also think the actual telling of this story left a lot to be desired. It was told mostly through memories. As Jessa's cleaning out Caleb's room, she happens upon different trinkets and different objects that sort of trigger memories for her in regards to Caleb. And so we spent most of the time in the past and not really in the present. And because of that, I felt like I didn't really know Jessa as a character. So I wasn't particularly bothered by her story, I guess, where she feels ostracized by the people in her school because they blame her for Caleb's car accident. That also felt really weak to me. And maybe that was her, the way she was viewing things, and maybe it wasn't like that. But again, we didn't really get a lot of Jessa's life. We got a lot of her relationship with Caleb. And then the second half of the book really shifts heavily into this other romance with Jessa and Max, which also felt weird. I don't know. I didn't particularly like this one. It was just kind of a little bit of a letdown for me personally. I'm just kind of it happened. I read it. And I'm gonna move on. There you have it. So basically, I ended the last 2 months with 3 5-star books and 2 2-star books, so I think that's pretty good. I don't often read 5 stars, so to get 3 of them in a 2-month period felt really awesome considering I only read 5 books. Maybe that's why I didn't read so much, because once I hit those 3 5-star ones, I was like, it can only go down from here, folks. That's my wrap up for May and June. Let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these, what your thoughts were, and what books you're reading currently. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys soon.